In a world where precision means the difference between life and death, where a single breath can determine victory or failure, one woman walked onto a military shooting range and changed everything. The seasoned snipers around her had spent years perfecting their craft, their fingers calloused from countless hours gripping rifle stocks, their eyes trained to spot targets others couldn't even see. They had records that stood untouchable for decades, achievements that spoke of dedication, skill, and unwavering focus. But when she asked those four simple words, "Mind if I try?" followed by laughter that echoed across the range, nobody could have predicted what was about to unfold. What happened next would shatter not just records, but assumptions about talent, determination, and what it truly means to be extraordinary. This isn't just a story about marksmanship. This is about the moment when preparation meets opportunity, when years of hidden practice suddenly burst into the spotlight, and when one person's quiet confidence rewrites the rules of what's possible. Get ready to witness how a single shot can change everything, and how sometimes the most devastating weapon on any battlefield isn't the rifle itself, but the person holding it. The story you're about to read will take you inside the mind of someone who transformed ridicule into respect, laughter into stunned silence, and doubt into absolute belief. Because when the smoke cleared and the targets were counted, everyone realized they had just witnessed something that would be talked about for generations to come. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Sarah Martinez walked through the gates for what everyone assumed would be another routine day. At 24 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned early in life that actions spoke louder than words. Her slight frame and unassuming presence often led people to underestimate her, a mistake she had grown accustomed to but never quite comfortable with. Sarah worked as a logistics coordinator for the base, handling supply chains and equipment maintenance with the same precision that others applied to their weapons training. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was important, and she took pride in ensuring that every piece of equipment was exactly where it needed to be, exactly when it was needed. Her colleagues respected her attention to detail, though few knew much about her life beyond the office walls. What they didn't know was that Sarah had been shooting since she was 8 years old. Her father, a veteran who had served 3 tours overseas, had taught her the fundamentals on their family's small ranch in Texas. Every weekend, they would set up targets in the back pasture, and he would patiently guide her through the mechanics of breathing, sight alignment, and trigger control. Shooting isn't about strength, he would tell her, his weathered hands gently adjusting her grip. It's about understanding yourself, understanding your weapon, and understanding the moment when everything comes together. Those lessons had stuck with her through the years, even as life took her far from the dusty Texas ranch where she had first learned to hold a rifle. During college, she had joined the shooting club, quietly dominating competitions while studying for her degree in logistics management. Her teammates often joked that she had ice water in her veins, the way she could steady her breathing and place shot after shot exactly where she intended. But military service had always called to her, not for the glory or the adventure that attracted so many others, but for the sense of purpose and precision that seemed to define everything about military life. When the opportunity arose to work on the base, she had jumped at the chance, seeing it as a way to contribute to something larger than herself while still maintaining the structured, detail-oriented environment where she thrived. The shooting range at the base was legendary among military personnel. Built to exacting specifications, it featured targets at distances ranging from 100 yards to over 1,000, with wind flags and environmental controls that could simulate conditions found anywhere in the world. The snipers who trained there were among the best in the military, men and women who had earned their positions through years of rigorous training and proven performance in the field. Sarah had walked past the range countless times during her 2 years on the base, always pausing to listen to the sharp crack of high-powered rifles and the occasional whoop of celebration when someone achieved a particularly difficult shot. She watched the snipers during their training sessions, noting their techniques, their equipment, and their obvious camaraderie. They were a tight-knit group, bound together by the demands of their profession and the mutual respect that came from mastering one of the military's most challenging disciplines. Master Sergeant Rodriguez was the range's commanding officer, a 30-year veteran whose reputation for developing elite marksmen was known throughout the military. Under his guidance, the base had produced more championship shooters than any other facility in the region. Rodriguez was a perfectionist who demanded nothing less than excellence from his students. But he was also fair and deeply committed to helping each shooter reach their full potential. The current base record for long-range precision shooting had stood for 7 years, set by Staff Sergeant Williams during a training exercise that had become the stuff of legend. Williams had placed 15 consecutive shots within a 2-inch circle at 800 yards, a feat that required not just exceptional skill, but also perfect conditions and a touch of luck. The record had been challenged numerous times since then, but no one had come close to matching Williams' achievement. On this particular morning, the range was buzzing with activity as the sniper team prepared for their monthly qualification exercise. Rodriguez had set up a challenging course that would test every aspect of their skills, from basic marksmanship to advanced techniques like shooting from awkward positions and compensating for changing wind conditions. The team members moved with the easy confidence of professionals, checking their equipment and discussing strategy with the casual expertise that came from years of experience. Sarah found herself with a few minutes between meetings, and she decided to take her usual route past the range. Something about watching the snipers train always fascinated her, perhaps because she could appreciate the level of precision and concentration required. As she approached the observation area, she could see Rodriguez addressing his team, his voice carrying clearly across the range as he explained the day's objectives. "Today we're going to push your limits," Rodriguez was saying, his weathered face serious as he looked at each of his shooters. "The targets are set at maximum distance. The wind conditions are challenging, and I want to see who among you has what it takes to get close to Williams' record. This isn't just about hitting the target. It's about proving that you have the mental toughness and technical skill to perform when everything is on the line." The team consisted of 6 shooters, each one a specialist with years of training and field experience. There was Johnson, a quiet man from Montana whose steady nerves had made him legendary among his peers. Martinez, no relation to Sarah despite sharing a surname, had grown up hunting in the mountains of Colorado and could read wind patterns like others read books. Thompson had served multiple tours overseas and carried herself with the confident bearing of someone who had proven herself under fire. As the exercise began, Sarah watched from her position near the fence, fascinated by the methodical way each shooter approached their task. They moved with deliberate precision, adjusting their positions, checking their scopes, and taking long moments to study the wind flags before settling into their shooting stance. The first few shots rang out across the range, followed by the spotters calling out hit locations through their binoculars. The results were impressive by any standard, with most shooters placing their rounds within acceptable margins at the extreme distance. But Rodriguez wanted more than acceptable. He wanted exceptional, and it was clear from his expressions that the current performance, while good, wasn't reaching the level he was hoping to see. "Not bad," Rodriguez called out after the first round of shooting, "but I've seen better from weekend hunters at the local gun club. These targets aren't going to hit themselves, and the enemy isn't going to give you multiple chances to get it right. I want to see some real precision here." The snipers took the criticism in stride, understanding that Rodriguez's high standards were what had made them as good as they were. They adjusted their positions, checked their equipment, and prepared for the next round of shots. Sarah could see the concentration on their faces, the way they shut out everything except the target in front of them and the weapon in their hands. As she watched, Sarah found herself mentally going through her own shooting routine, the one her father had taught her all those years ago. She could feel her breathing naturally slowing, her mind calculating wind drift and bullet drop based on the conditions she was observing. It was an automatic response, developed through years of practice and reinforced by countless hours at shooting ranges far less sophisticated than this one. The second round of shooting produced slightly better results, but Rodriguez's expression suggested that he still wasn't seeing the level of performance he expected. Sarah could understand his frustration. These were elite shooters, people who had dedicated their careers to mastering this particular skill set. If they couldn't perform at peak level during training, How could they be expected to deliver when lives were on the line? As the morning progressed, Sarah found herself increasingly absorbed in the training session. She watched each shooter's technique, noting the subtle differences in their approaches and the way they adapted to the changing conditions. The wind had picked up slightly, adding an extra element of difficulty to an already challenging exercise. Rodriguez called for a break, and the snipers gathered around him for a debriefing session. Sarah could see them discussing the morning's performance, their body language suggesting a mix of frustration and determination. These were competitive people who took pride in their abilities, and falling short of their own high standards clearly bothered them. During the break, Sarah noticed several other base personnel had stopped to watch the training session. Marksmanship was always a source of fascination for military personnel, regardless of their specific role. There was something almost hypnotic about watching a skilled shooter work, the way they could make incredibly difficult shots look effortless. As the snipers prepared to resume their training, Rodriguez made an announcement that caught Sarah's attention. "I'm going to give each of you one more chance to impress me," he said, his voice carrying across the range. "Single shot, best technique, maximum distance. Show me what you're really capable of when everything is on the line." The challenge hung in the air like the morning mist, and Sarah could feel the tension as each sniper prepared for what was essentially a do-or-die moment. This was the kind of pressure that separated good shooters from great ones, the moment when technical skill had to combine with mental toughness to produce something exceptional. Sarah checked her watch and realized she needed to get back to her office soon. But something kept her rooted in place. Perhaps it was professional curiosity, or maybe just the universal appeal of watching masters at work. Whatever the reason, she found herself unwilling to leave before seeing how this final challenge would play out. The first shooter settled into position, and the range fell silent except for the gentle rustle of wind flags. Sarah held her breath along with everyone else, waiting for the shot that would either redeem the morning's performance or confirm Rodriguez's suspicions that his team was falling short of their potential. The crack of the rifle split the morning air, followed by tense seconds as the spotters studied the target through high-powered binoculars. Close, came the call, but not close enough. One by one, the remaining shooters took their turns, each one producing competent but not exceptional results. Rodriguez's expression grew more serious with each shot, and Sarah could sense his disappointment. These were good shooters, perhaps even great ones, but today they weren't performing at the level that their training and experience should have made possible. As the final shooter prepared for their attempt, Sarah found herself thinking about her father's words from all those years ago. "Shooting isn't about the gun," he had told her. "It's about understanding yourself and trusting your instincts. When you can quiet your mind and listen to what your body is telling you, that's when the magic happens." The last shot rang out, and the spotter's call confirmed what everyone already suspected. Good, but not great. Competent, but not exceptional. Rodriguez shook his head and began gathering his equipment, clearly frustrated with the morning's results. Sarah was about to turn and head back to her office when something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the disappointment she could see in Rodriguez's face, or maybe it was simply the competitive streak that had driven her to excel in every shooting competition she had ever entered. Whatever the reason, she found herself walking toward the range instead of away from it. Rodriguez looked up as she approached, his expression curious but not unwelcoming. Sarah had worked on the base long enough to be known and respected, even if few people were aware of her background in competitive shooting. "Afternoon, Martinez," Rodriguez said, using the military's preferred method of address. "Enjoying the show?" "Actually," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I was wondering something." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by whatever had brought the logistics coordinator to his range during training hours. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settling around her like a familiar blanket. The words that came next would change everything, though she couldn't possibly know that at the time. They would transform her from an observer into a participant, from someone who watched others attempt greatness to someone who defined it. "Mind if I try?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged rifle, and, for a moment, the entire range seemed frozen in time. Rodriguez stared at Sarah, his weathered face showing a mixture of surprise and curiosity, while the 6 elite snipers behind him exchanged glances that ranged from amused to openly skeptical. The silence stretched on for several heartbeats before Johnson, the quiet shooter from Montana, let out a low chuckle that quickly spread to the rest of the group. "Did the logistics lady just ask if she could try?" Martinez asked, his voice carrying just enough edge to make it clear what he thought of the idea. "No offense, Martinez, but this isn't exactly like organizing supply schedules." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it was dismissive in a way that Sarah had experienced many times before. She stood quietly, her expression unchanged, waiting for the amusement to run its course. Years of proving herself in male-dominated environments had taught her that getting defensive or angry would only confirm their assumptions about her capabilities. Rodriguez held up a hand, and the laughter gradually died down. His expression was thoughtful as he studied Sarah, taking in her calm demeanor and the way she seemed completely unfazed by the team's reaction. In his 30 years of military service, he had learned to recognize people who possessed hidden depths, and something about Sarah's quiet confidence suggested there might be more to her request than simple curiosity. "You ever handle a precision rifle before?" Rodriguez asked, his tone neutral but probing. "Some," Sarah replied, deliberately understating her experience. "I did a little competitive shooting in college." "A little competitive shooting," Thompson repeated, shaking her head with a grin. "Rodriguez, we've been training for hours trying to match Williams' record, and now the supply officer wants to take a shot because she did a little competitive shooting in college." "Supply coordinator," Sarah corrected mildly, and it was more than a little. Rodriguez studied her for another long moment, his experienced eyes searching for something that his instincts were telling him might be there. He had seen enough shooters over the years to recognize certain signs, subtle indicators that separated those who merely handled weapons from those who truly understood them. Sarah's posture, the way she held herself, the calm steadiness of her breathing even under the scrutiny of his elite team, all suggested someone who was far more comfortable around firearms than her day job would indicate. "What kind of competitive shooting?" he asked, genuinely curious now. "Precision rifle mostly," Sarah said. "Some 3-position smallbore, but I preferred the longer distances. State championships in Texas, couple of regional competitions in college." Johnson's laughter had stopped completely now, and he was studying Sarah with new interest. Texas was serious shooting country, and anyone who had competed at the state level there had demonstrated real skill. Regional college competitions were another matter entirely, representing some of the best young shooters in the country. "What distances?" Rodriguez continued his questioning, his tone becoming more professional. "1,000 yards was my favorite," Sarah replied, and she could see the subtle shift in the team's attitude. 1,000-yard shooting was no joke, requiring not just exceptional marksmanship skills, but also a deep understanding of ballistics, environmental factors, and mental discipline. "What kind of groups were you shooting?" This question came from Thompson, her earlier amusement replaced by genuine curiosity. "Depends on conditions," Sarah said, but on a good day, sub-minute of angle was pretty consistent. The range fell silent again, but this time the quiet carried a different quality. Sub-minute of angle accuracy at 1,000 yards meant groups smaller than 10 inches, a level of precision that even experienced military shooters respected. If Sarah was being truthful about her capabilities, she wasn't just someone who had dabbled in competitive shooting. She was someone who had excelled at it. Rodriguez made his decision with the quick certainty of someone accustomed to reading people and situations accurately. "Tell you what," he said, "if you're willing to put your money where your mouth is, I'll let you take a shot. Same conditions as my team, same target, same distance." "What's the catch?" Sarah asked, sensing there was more to the offer. "No catch," Rodriguez replied. "But if you miss by more than acceptable military standards, you owe me a case of beer. If you actually manage to hit within acceptable parameters, I'll buy the first round next time the team goes out." Sarah considered the offer for a moment, weighing the risks and benefits. She hadn't fired a precision rifle in several months, and she was completely unfamiliar with the specific weapon system the team was using. On the other hand, the fundamentals of marksmanship were universal, and she had always been able to adapt quickly to new equipment. "What rifle am I shooting?" she asked. Rodriguez gestured toward a long, imposing weapon resting in a bipod near the shooting line. M24 sniper weapon system, modified with a custom barrel and match-grade ammunition. Same setup my team has been using all morning. Sarah nodded, recognizing the weapon system from her research into military equipment procurement. The M24 was a proven platform, known for its accuracy and reliability. She walked over to examine the rifle, her movements becoming more purposeful as she shifted into the mental state that had served her so well in competition. The weapon was heavier than what she was accustomed to, but beautifully balanced and obviously maintained to exacting standards. She could see the care that had gone into its setup, from the precisely adjusted scope to the custom trigger that had been tuned for minimum creep and overtravel. This was a shooter's rifle, built and maintained by people who understood the demands of precision marksmanship. "What's the zero distance?" she asked, running her hands along the rifle stock to get a feel for its dimensions. 200 yards, Johnson answered, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional interest. Scope is a Leupold Mark IV, adjusted for the specific ballistics of this ammunition lot. Sarah nodded, automatically calculating the trajectory adjustments she would need for the 800-yard target. The mathematics of long-range shooting had always come naturally to her, and she found herself falling into the familiar routine of range estimation, wind reading, and ballistic computation that had been second nature during her competitive years. "Wind conditions?" she asked, studying the flags that dotted the range at regular intervals. "Variable," Rodriguez replied. "Probably 5 to 8 miles per hour from the left, but it's been gusting up to 12. You'll need to read it yourself and make the call." Sarah spent several minutes studying the wind indicators, watching the patterns of grass movement, and the way the flags responded to the shifting air currents. Wind reading was as much art as science, requiring a shooter to interpret multiple sources of information and synthesize them into actionable adjustments. The afternoon breeze was definitely tricky, with enough variation to make precise wind calls challenging even for experienced shooters. "Ammunition specs?" she asked, continuing her systematic preparation. "Federal gold medal match, 168 grain Sierra Match King," Thompson supplied. "Muzzle velocity around 2,600 feet per second with this barrel length." Sarah nodded, storing away the ballistic information and running quick calculations in her head. The 168 grain Match King was a proven long-range bullet with predictable flight characteristics, though it would start to lose stability at extreme distances. For 800 yards, it would still be performing well within its effective range. Rodriguez watched Sarah's methodical preparation with growing interest. Her questions were exactly what he would expect from a serious shooter, covering all the variables that could affect accuracy at long range. More importantly, her calm, businesslike approach suggested someone who was accustomed to performing under pressure. "Take your time getting familiar with the weapon," Rodriguez said. "No point in setting you up to fail because you're not comfortable with the equipment." Sarah appreciated the fairness of the offer, understanding that Rodriguez was giving her the same considerations he would extend to any of his regular shooters. She settled behind the rifle, adjusting the bipod legs and finding her natural point of aim. The position felt good, with the weapon's weight distributed properly and her body aligned in a way that would provide maximum stability. She spent several minutes working the bolt and getting familiar with the trigger's characteristics. Every weapon had its own personality, subtle differences in how it handled and responded to the shooter's inputs. The M24's trigger was crisp and clean, breaking at what felt like around 3 pounds with minimal overtravel. The bolts cycled smoothly, and the scope's adjustment turrets moved with positive clicks that inspired confidence in their precision. "Ready whenever you are," Rodriguez said, checking his watch. "Target is 800 yards, same as what my team has been shooting all morning." Sarah chambered around and settled into her final shooting position. Through the scope, she could see the target clearly, a standard military silhouette with scoring rings that would determine whether her shot met acceptable standards. The afternoon sun created good lighting conditions, with no mirage visible at the target distance. She spent a full minute studying the wind conditions, watching the movement of grass and the behavior of the wind flags at different distances along the bullet's path. The breeze was coming from her left at roughly 7 miles per hour, but she could see patches where it was stronger or weaker. Reading wind was always the most challenging aspect of long-range shooting, and conditions like these separated competent marksmen from exceptional ones. Finally, satisfied with her wind call, Sarah began her shooting sequence. She controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to slow and her body to settle into complete stillness. The scope's crosshairs steadied on the target as she found her natural respiratory pause, that moment between breaths when the human body achieves its maximum stability. The trigger broke cleanly, and the rifle recoiled straight back into her shoulder with the authority of a precision weapon firing match-grade ammunition. Sarah maintained her sight picture, following through as the bullet traced its arc across the 800 yards separating her from the target. The spotter, who had been tracking the bullet's flight through high-powered binoculars, was quiet for several seconds as he studied the target. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of surprise that made everyone on the range lean forward in anticipation. "Hit," he called out, then paused as he refined his assessment. Dead center of the X-ring. The silence that followed was different from the earlier quiet. This wasn't the polite attention of people watching a demonstration. This was the stunned quiet of professionals who had just witnessed something unexpected and impressive. Sarah had not just hit the target at maximum distance. She had placed her shot in the most demanding area of the scoring system. Rodriguez walked down range with his binoculars, wanting to confirm the hit with his own eyes. When he returned, his expression was serious but impressed. "X-ring, dead center," he announced. "That's a qualifying shot for any sniper school in the military." The team members exchanged glances, their earlier amusement completely evaporated. Johnson whistled low under his breath, while Thompson shook her head in obvious disbelief. Martinez, who had been the most vocal in his skepticism, was studying Sarah with new respect. "Lucky shot?" Johnson asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Sarah was already chambering another round. "Want to find out?" Rodriguez held up a hand, his mind racing as he processed what had just happened. A single exceptional shot could indeed be attributed to luck, but Sarah's calm preparation and methodical approach suggested someone who knew exactly what she was doing. More importantly, her immediate willingness to repeat the performance indicated a level of confidence that only came from genuine skill. "Hold on," he said, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "If you're willing, I'd like to propose something a little more interesting than just another target shot." Sarah looked up from the rifle, curious about what Rodriguez had in mind. Around the range, other base personnel had begun to gather, drawn by word that something unusual was happening at the sniper training facility. "I'm listening," Sarah said. Rodriguez smiled, the expression of a veteran instructor who had just recognized an opportunity to witness something truly special. "How about we see if you can challenge Williams' base record?" The suggestion hit the gathered crowd like an electric shock. Williams' record was legendary, a performance that had been attempted dozens of times without success. The idea that someone who wasn't even officially trained as a sniper might challenge it seemed almost absurd. 15 consecutive shots in a 2-inch circle at 800 yards, Rodriguez continued. "Same conditions, same equipment, same target. What do you say?" Sarah considered the challenge, understanding the magnitude of what was being proposed. Williams' record wasn't just about marksmanship. It was about maintaining absolute consistency under pressure, shot after shot, without a single error in judgment or execution. It required not just skill, but the kind of mental toughness that separated elite performers from everyone else. "What happens if I actually manage it?" she asked. Rodriguez grinned, the expression of someone who was about to make a bet he was confident he would win. "If you can beat Williams' record, I'll recommend you for immediate transfer to sniper school, full endorsement for the advanced marksmanship program." The offer was extraordinary, representing a direct path to one of the military's most elite specialties. Sarah understood that Rodriguez was essentially wagering his professional reputation on the belief that such a performance was impossible for someone without formal military sniper training. "And if I don't?" she asked. "Then, you go back to your logistics job with a great story to tell," Rodriguez replied. "But, either way, you've got the respect of my team for that first shot." Sarah looked at the gathering crowd, recognizing faces from across the base who had come to witness what was shaping up to be either an embarrassing failure or something truly remarkable. The pressure was building, but It was the familiar pressure of competition that she had learned to channel into focus rather than anxiety. "All right," she said, settling back behind the rifle. "Let's see what happens." As word spread across the base that someone was attempting to break Williams' legendary record, more personnel began arriving at the range. What had started as a routine training exercise was transforming into something else entirely, a moment when an ordinary day had the potential to become extraordinary. Sarah chambered a fresh round and began her mental preparation for what would either be 15 perfect shots or a very public demonstration of why records like Williams were so difficult to achieve. Either way, she was committed now, and the only way forward was through the scope of the rifle in front of her. News of the record attempt spread through the base with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. Within 20 minutes of Rodriguez announcing the challenge, nearly 50 people had gathered around the shooting range, creating an impromptu audience that included everyone from junior enlisted personnel to senior officers who had heard about the situation and decided to witness it firsthand. Sarah could feel their presence behind her, a weight of expectation that threatened to disrupt the calm focus she had spent years cultivating. Colonel Harrison, the base commanding officer, arrived just as Sarah was preparing for her second shot. A 25-year veteran with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command, Harrison had heard about Williams' record being challenged and wanted to see for himself what was happening. His arrival added another layer of pressure to an already intense situation, transforming what had begun as an informal demonstration into something approaching an official event. "Rodriguez," Harrison said, approaching the range commander with the measured stride of senior leadership. "I understand we have someone attempting to challenge the base record?" "Yes, sir," Rodriguez replied, snapping to attention. "Martinez here has demonstrated exceptional marksmanship ability and requested permission to attempt Williams' 15-shot record." Harrison studied Sarah with the appraising look of someone who had spent decades evaluating military personnel. He took in her calm demeanor, the professional way she had set up her shooting position, and the methodical approach she was taking to her preparation. His expression remained neutral, but Sarah could sense his skepticism about the likelihood of success. "What's her background?" Harrison asked. "Competitive shooting in Texas, state-level competition, some regional work in college," Rodriguez summarized. "Just placed a perfect center shot at 800 yards on her first attempt with our equipment." Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly at this information. He was familiar enough with marksmanship to understand that placing a perfect shot at maximum distance wasn't something that happened by accident, especially with an unfamiliar weapon system. Still, one good shot was very different from 15 consecutive perfect shots under pressure. "Carry on then," Harrison said, positioning himself where he could observe the attempt without interfering. "Let's see what happens." Sarah could hear the murmur of conversation behind her as more people continued to arrive. Word had reached the administrative buildings, the motor pool, even the mess hall, drawing spectators from every corner of the base. She recognized the voices of colleagues from her logistics unit, people who knew her as the quiet, efficient coordinator who kept their supply chains running smoothly but who had never imagined her in this context. The weight of their attention was both motivating and potentially distracting. Sarah had competed in front of crowds before, but never with stakes this high and never with an audience that included her commanding officer and colleagues who would have to work with her regardless of how this attempt turned out. Success would bring respect and opportunity. Failure would mean facing these same people every day with the memory of a very public defeat. She forced herself to block out the external pressure and focus on the fundamentals that had served her throughout her competitive career. Breathing, sight picture, trigger control, follow-through. These were constants that didn't change whether she was shooting alone on her family's ranch or attempting to set a record in front of half the base personnel. The second shot required the same methodical preparation as the first. Wind conditions had shifted slightly, the afternoon breeze picking up just enough to require a fractional adjustment in her aim point. Sarah spent long moments reading the wind indicators, knowing that even a small error in judgment could send the bullet outside the demanding accuracy requirements of Williams' record. Through the scope, the target looked impossibly small at 800 yards. The 2-inch circle that defined the record represented less than a quarter minute of angle, demanding precision that left no room for any imperfection in technique or equipment. Sarah could see the hole from her first shot, a perfect center punch that served as both encouragement and a reminder of the standard she needed to maintain. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow as her body settled into the familiar rhythm of precision shooting. The crosshairs steadied on the target as she found her natural point of aim, that perfect moment when weapon, position, and shooter aligned in harmony. The trigger broke cleanly, and the rifle recoiled with the same authority as before. "Hit, 2-inch circle," the spotter called out, and Sarah could hear a murmur of approval from the growing crowd. 2 shots didn't make a record, but they established a pattern that suggested she might actually have the consistency required for a serious attempt. Rodriguez nodded approvingly, but his expression remained serious. As an experienced instructor, he understood that the early shots were often the easiest, before fatigue and pressure began to accumulate. The real test would come in the middle and late shots, when mental toughness became as important as technical skill. "That's 2, Rodriguez announced to the crowd, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. 13 more to go. Sarah chambered a third round, her movements becoming more automatic as she settled into the rhythm that had served her so well in competition. The routine was important, providing structure and consistency that helped maintain focus under pressure. Each shot followed the same careful sequence of preparation, execution, and follow-through. Shot 3 found the circle, as did shot 4. By the 5th shot, the crowd had grown larger and quieter, the initial buzz of conversation giving way to focused attention as people began to realize they might be witnessing something truly special. Sarah could feel the change in atmosphere, the way excited chatter had been replaced by the tense quiet of people holding their breath. Colonel Harrison moved closer to the shooting line, his military bearing unchanged, but his interest clearly piqued by the consistent performance he was witnessing. Behind him, other senior officers had arrived, drawn by reports of an unprecedented marksmanship demonstration. The gathering now included the base's entire leadership structure, adding layers of pressure that would have overwhelmed most shooters. 5 for 5, the spotter called out after Sarah's latest shot, and the crowd's reaction was noticeably more subdued than it had been after the first few hits. The novelty was wearing off, replaced by the growing realization that they might actually be watching someone challenge one of the base's most legendary records. Sarah tried to maintain her focus on the immediate task, blocking out thoughts about what success or failure might mean for her future. Her father had taught her to approach each shot as if it were the only one that mattered, to avoid getting ahead of herself by thinking about results instead of process. The discipline served her well now, allowing her to maintain the mental clarity essential for consistent precision. Shot 6 landed in the circle, followed by 7 and 8. With each successive hit, the pressure seemed to build exponentially. What had started as an amusing diversion was becoming something much